Good evening, everyone. My name is John Taves, and I'm the event coordinator here at McNally Robinson Booksellers. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that McNally Robinson is located here in Treaty 1 territory. That's the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. In addition, McNally Robinson Booksellers itself rests on the land once occupied by the Métis community of Roostertown. We are gathered here today to celebrate the publication of the horror anthology, What Draws Us Near, featuring editors Keith Cadieux and Adam Petrash alongside contributors Seyward Goodhand and Joanna Graham. You can applaud as well. I made this comment at the Adrienne Chartrand event a little while ago. It's so rare that we actually have an opportunity to launch something horror related here at the store, so it's always a particular thrill whenever we have that opportunity. In addition to tonight's panelists, you'll also get to meet contributors Lauren Carter and Chadwick Kinther, who will be signing copies of this anthology at the end of the event. Sadly, our previously announced contributor Susie Maloney is unable to join us this evening, although we do send her our very best. What Draws Us Near is published by Little Ghost Press, an imprint run out of the incredible indie horror bookshop, Little Ghosts in Toronto, the first indie horror themed bookstore in the country. They can be found at 930 Dundas Street West the next time you happen to be in Toronto, and you should visit their website, follow them on all social media, and just generally celebrate their spooky existence. To give you a sense of how the evening will flow, there'll be a brief introduction from the co-editors that will take place right over here before they join Seyward and Joanna in conversation. Following that, there'll be an opportunity for you in the audience to ask questions if you so desire. If you're located here in this space, please just put up your hand and ask your question. One of the co-editors will then repeat the question before answering it. If you're watching online, please feel free to write any questions you might have in the chat, and we will put them to the panel as time permits. I'll be back at the close of the event to review signing procedures, so there's something exciting to look forward to. But the only thing I will put in your mind at this point is that we will ask you all to remain seated for one moment while we transport all those participating safely to the signing table at the close of the event. It's now my great pleasure to introduce the writers or the editors of the volume as I turn off the hoop from our overhead PA system. As stirring as Bob O'Reilly is when accompanying the intro. Keith Cadieux is a Winnipeg writer and editor. Most recently, he is the co-editor of this featured anthology, but a short story collection by him is on the way in 2024, which, if you've engaged with any of his writing, from his novellas to his short stories, you will know that is truly something to look forward to. Adam Petrash is an award-nominated editor and writer from here in Winnipeg. In addition to What Draws Us Near, he is the editor of the short comics collection Dead Work and the co-editor of the speculative fiction anthologies Alternate Plains, Stories of Prairie Speculative Fiction, and Parallel Prairies, Stories of Manitoba Speculative Fiction. Please join me in welcoming Keith Cadieux and Adam Petrash.
Thanks so much for the intro, John. Very kind words, that's nice. So yeah, just to kick off, I guess Adam and I can talk a little bit about how this idea sort of came together, and it came together very quickly and not quite effortlessly, but maybe differently focused effort than we had imagined. But we had both worked on editing anthologies separately, and we've known each other for years through the horror community. It was always sort of like a dream project that, hey, we should get together and we should do one. We have such similar tastes. We seem to be able to work together really well. And so it sort of started with the genesis of just something like that. Like we should do a book. Woo, we want to do a book about. And then we just eventually sort of settled on the topic for this one, which was quite loose and broad, but it was just the idea of various stories that were centered around some kind of forbidden text. So not necessarily a book, but something that you're not supposed to be looking at or not supposed to be engaging with. And those are stories that I've always really enjoyed. So I was really glad that Adam had a similar affinity for the idea. We cobbled together a dream list of who are some writers that we really respect and admire that we would love to have in it, and we'll just ask and they'll say no, and then we'll keep going down the list. And they started saying yes pretty much immediately. Like we cobbled together really like quite a dream list of people that we really wanted to engage with, and that we had like essentially cold emailed people that we didn't know. And we're delighted that they were interested and wanted to be a part of it. And we're lucky that Manitoba has like such a good arts granting program. It has its issues, but it's better than lots of other places that don't have anything. And so we were able to like not go out of pocket to actually get people interested in doing it. So we were able to like actually ask people and say that we'd be able to pay them to be in it, rather than prospectively like, hey, if we get it published, maybe then you'll get $20 or something. So we were able to like sort of hit the ground running and start working on it before we had settled some of the logistical issues of like who's gonna pay to print this and send it out everywhere. And I think as Adam saw on like, so, and then we both are following Little Ghost Books, that opened a horror bookstore opened in Toronto during the pandemic. I had a little like online obsession that I was just watching everything they were doing. I couldn't wait to go and see the place. Adam saw them on Twitter one day. They're just like, hey, we're thinking about breaking into publishing. Does anybody know what that entails, or like, how would that go? And I emailed them right away. I'm like, I have a book. Would you like to publish our book? And they were super into it, really delighted, and just sort of snapped it up right away. And we got a really good relationship with the owner of the store there, and was sort of like, again, just hit the ground running. It came together unbelievably fast. So that was sort of where like the maybe the different effort that we were set up for, like, okay, it's gonna be like a year before we get someone to agree, and then it'll be a year and a half before it comes out. And then Little Ghosts just had it. We had no idea. It was printed and ready to go, and all that kind of stuff. It was just this crazy world when it all came together. So we're really glad to be able to do something here rather than, you know, only in Toronto, because it is, you know, it is a small indie store. So like the reach is a little bit different than going with a dedicated publisher. But it's been really great and exciting to work with them as they get it sort of set up. And now we have it here, and it's sort of got a nice little reach with our book. But do you have anything to find out about that?
I think you covered it really well.
All right.
Yeah, like I think we were sitting around in your backyard around a fire, and we're like, we should work together. I think Darren was there too. And I was like, yeah, and I'm like, you're like, I have this idea. And I'm like, cool, let's do it. And then I think we pitched it to Mac. Yes, cold emailed everyone. It was all yes. We're very surprised. Ghost thing. So all kind of, it's like magical.
Yeah.
In the sense of like everything lined up, perfect timing, couldn't be happier.
Yeah, it all sort of fell in our laps. So thanks for coming and helping us celebrate just us sort of dicking around. So we have some prepared questions for Joanna and Seyward, and we'll sort of let the conversation go where it goes, and we'd like to include questions from everyone else too. I'm going to be, you know, inelegant and just read them off my phone. But so Joanna Graham is a Winnipeg writer, reader, and avid tea drinker who's always been drawn to any piece of literature likely to make your skin crawl. Last spring, she was nominated for the John Hirsch Emerging Manitoba Writer Award. She holds a master's degree in prose fiction from the University of East Anglia, and her fiction has appeared in anthologies, chapbooks, and magazines. As a bookseller, she manages the horror section here, and she reads and writes whenever she can. And then we also have Seyward Goodhand, whose stories have been shortlisted for the Writers' Trust McClelland and Stewart Jury Prize, the National Magazine Award, and longlisted for the CBC Short Story Prize. Her first book, Even That Wildest Hope, was a finalist for Manitoba Book Awards, Margaret Lawrence Award for Fiction, and the Eileen McTavish Sykes Award for Best First Book, and longlisted for the 2020 Sunburst Award for Excellence in Canadian Literature of the Fantastic. Your accolades are very wordy. She also holds a PhD in English from the University of Toronto. Right now she's at work on a novel for which she received funding from the Canada Council of Manitoba Arts Council. She's based in Winnipeg and is also the Manitoba Saskatchewan rep for the Writers Union of Canada.
Well, now Sarah ends it.
Now Sarah, okay,
Yeah.
so you're not.
I'm not. No.
Okay.
I had a baby, and then now Sarah ends as the rep for anyone who needs the rep.
So strike that.
That would be, yeah.
So welcome. Yeah, you guys.
So, what do you guys think anthologies achieve that other forms of writing may not? Because it's a very specific type of collection.
Very good question. I would probably say the breadth of topics covered is a very interesting achievement, as well as bringing together some really well-known established authors with maybe some new voices as well. Reading this collection, the variety of interpretations of text and forbidden and what was drawing the characters near was really surprising and lovely to read. And there were definitely stories in here from names that I was watching and excited to read. And then there were people that I hadn't read yet and that I was really excited to discover their voices. So.
Yeah, I think there's a variety of all kinds that you would get in an anthology like this. For the reader, getting a mix of writers they haven't, read before and a mix of established and emerging writers, that's true. And then for the writer, I think writing for an anthology gives you an opportunity to find a really weird story that you have kicking around. That's maybe a bit goblin-like and gangly, and to get it into a shape and to work with an editor is a bit more of a pathway to having it, be able to work with an editor with a story like that. So I think you can get some really eccentric work in an anthology. Because I think if you're reading from the slush pile, you get tired as a reader, right? So you end up choosing things that sometimes are less tiring to read or something, or refreshing for whatever reason. But in an anthology, maybe there's a bit more patience when you're soliciting the stuff for something really eccentric, I would say.
Yeah, for sure. So just sort of building off like somewhat related. So what about the theme we had here? So like you guys know, you read the emails that got sent to everybody. It was a pretty loose idea of what might go in this anthology, but like what about that sort of call or that theme drew you in? Or like what made you want to write to that kind of idea?
Well, for me, forbidden texts and what draws us near was kind of like a combination of two things that I've always been interested in: text, stories, books, and then sort of the forbidden with a sinister kind of horror angle. So I was very excited just at the idea. And then also, as I sort of mentioned, the layers of what could constitute the text and what could constitute how it's forbidden on an individual level, psychological level, societal level, all sorts of that. And then personally, it made me look at what might be well referred to as a gangly story I had in a slightly different way. Thinking of adding a text into it kind of really helped focus my protagonists' regret, anxieties, conflicts, and tensions onto sort of a solid thing and brought some more stuff out onto the page.
Yeah, I think I tend to have a hard time writing to prompts, although I ended up I'm just innately rebellious, I think. So I'm like the whole time I'm like end up doing the opposite of the thing I'm supposed to be doing. And but this time I didn't. I managed to. Well, yeah, I managed to eventually do the idea.
Yes.
But I think what's interesting about forbidden text, it's kind of like forbidden thoughts. And this is what writing is a weird medium, right? It's just like doesn't require any physical skill exactly. It's you're not sculpting anything or drawing anything. It's only something you're playing around with someone else's mind, right? You're just getting someone else to think of things. And there are obviously lots of scary thoughts to have, right? And so forbidden texts and forbidden thoughts, forbidden things to, it's like a tantalizing limit, I guess, interests me about that. Yeah.
Yeah, tension is kind of built into it. And that's quite key for sustaining a neat horror story. I think.
Glad you brought that up because we're going to ask what elements or themes do you think need to be present in order for a horror story to be successful?
Well, I would sort of generally say a lot of the same elements that have to be present in any story to make it successful. Tension, emotional resonance, persuasive, compelling characters and conflict. And I'm just going to speak subjectively about for horror for me. It's usually some enduring emotion behind all of the really weird, potentially bloody, violent stuff that is going on. I like things that have well thought out monsters and things that have an element of surprise, even if that surprise is horrifying, something I haven't quite read before, or something that I have read before that has made the familiar unfamiliar, and a bit of a mystery or a hook, as always, to figure out what on earth is happening. Is all of this blood justified?
I totally agree with the emotional resonance behind things. So yeah, I think from a horror, from the genre, what I want is I want it to be really, really internal and psychological, which is generally, I think, what I want from anything I read. Not like I want things to happen too, and for there to be objects and things in the world to be very full that the characters are looking at, but I want whatever is seen to be like mediated clearly through some kind of emotion or imagination and perception. And it's that skewing of the perceptual whole apparatus that the writers bring into it that makes it really interesting to me. So it's the world combined with a strong emotion or with imagination of some kind that then amplifies the whole thing and extends the reality of even if what you're describing is obviously like things like dolls can be very scary, and they're not, and why is that? Just because it's they're not actually coming to life with machetes, right? It's just that you're seeing something that looks like a baby that's and you're thinking a thing you're not supposed to think of when you're looking at the baby, right? So it's a combination of the thought with the thing. So yeah, I think a big emotional internal landscape is really important in horror as well.
No, all right. So something I was curious about is whether or not you guys sort of identify yourselves as women in horror, or like does that sort of name have any meaning anymore? Is that still a thing? Is it sort of going by the wayside?
I don't know. I don't think I identify like that, but maybe I just lack self-consciousness. I don't know how I identify in general. I mean, I like a lot of classical women in horror. I love Shirley Jackson. She's exactly the kind of writer I'm talking about, really psychological and internal. But no, I mean, I have like chosen ancestors I like, but they're also not only in horror. So I don't know. I like to dabble. I like to add horror elements, but not exactly.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't, again, consciously think of myself that way until it comes up as sort of an external description, and then I'm like, oh yes, I suppose so.
You're like, I am a woman, maybe.
Yes, yes, and I think my stories are horror, yes, okay. I think it's interesting. I do think that I'm kind of in an interesting bubble working here, and you're asking if it's going by the wayside. And when I'm thinking of the books that I'm seeing coming out, I'm seeing so many more gender diverse names, Rachel Harrison, Hiram Enns, Mariana Enriquez, and many, many more that are populating the shelves alongside maybe some of the more familiar going back in history, obviously that ratio goes down. So it's really exciting to see all the stuff that's coming out. And what I'm never certain of is when I step outside of this bubble, how many people would recognize all the names that I recognize alongside the really famous male writers. How many people are going to recognize when I say Mariana Enriquez versus when I say Stephen King? I see my sister put her hand up. Good job, Stephanie.
I do think horror often involves some kind of engagement with the domestic.
Yes.
Whoever's writing it, it has to, there's something about the familiar, the cozy, and the home being distorted, you know? It's not like it's not usually taking place in a battlefield or some sort of epic setting, right? It's usually about homes gone awry. Obviously that's not it's the domain of everyone, not just of women, but you know, something like The Yellow Wallpaper or something like that classic horror-ish story, like it's about being trapped in a home. So I think the feeling of being trapped in a home, the feeling of being trapped inside another person's reality and not knowing what's real, madness, trapped in a head, trapped in a home.
Absolutely.
These are all like classic things that you're engaging with in the horror genre. I mean, anyone can set their things there, but yeah.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think there's maybe like, so just sort of to build off that a little bit, that you're like the domestic of horror, it's like really rooted in the uncomfortable and like that something is wrong.
Yeah.
And it sure seems like for most of history, you know, women's reality has been more uncomfortable, and marginalized people's reality has been more uncomfortable. And we seem to be at a time where not that they're not uncomfortable anymore, but all of a sudden there is a bit of a propensity to listen and to actually like, yeah, I can see that kind of thing. Whereas before it was like, no, we don't listen to those.
Yeah, or that's not quite horror. Or if you're writing it, I think there's horror in all kinds of different literature. And again, another thing that I wonder is, you know, a frightening or a horrifying novel, if it's categorized a certain way throughout history because of the gender of its author and how that's perceived. But yeah, I do think there's little bits of horror everywhere in lots of different novels across the board.
That's right. Yeah, it's sort of like, I think horror is actually an exploration. I think it's, now that I think of it in this conversation, I think it's very intimate. The horror I like anyway, there's an intimacy to it, and it's about, you know, distortions or not being sure about whether what's being seen is real, or you know, there's often a sense on the reader's part, and the writer's doing this too, is the monster there, or is it a projection?
Mm-hmm.
Whose projection? But yeah, it feels like a very, very intimate genre, you know. Yeah.
I would agree.
I would say Mariana Enriquez and Katrina Porter are good. What you guys are describing.
Yeah.
Right. So then I guess like we're sort of dovetailing into it already, but I know like you guys read quite widely, and that you do that kind of Joanna, for sure you're a horror fan, and Seyward, we have talked about stuff that is horror, so I know you read it. But sort of like outside of your own work, do you see horror as kind of like, is it having a moment? Is it gaining in any popularity or legitimacy?
Definitely popularity, I would say, and I hope it lasts longer than a moment. So anecdotally, our horror section has expanded from 1 bank to 3 banks, and that's obviously driven by demand. So that's really exciting to see, and we've got more room to stock a lot more writers. And again, if it could just be in my bubble, but I'm seeing it quite a lot. And so I do think it is crossing into the mainstream a bit. I'm patient for it to go really fast. But yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it felt like big in like the 80s and 90s too. With like I loved Stephen King as a teenager, and then his movies, like the books got made into movies that were I don't know, seemed kind of important in my youth, you know. Maybe it dipped, maybe it went away for a bit, I don't know, and maybe it's coming back. it seems like it's horror, it seems like broadly, like over the last few centuries, part of the modern, interestingly, even though it's often written to sound, you know, sometimes it can even sound like it's written in an old-fashioned mode or antique sometimes. But I think it comes with modernity for whatever reason. I'm not sure why. Maybe, you know, often it's not involving things like machines, like say sci-fi would be, but it's kind of involving more organic things. But yeah.
Yeah, here and there, like sometimes machines, like Cronenberg would be someone
Yeah,
who's
that's
obsessed
right. Yeah.
with machines. Dracula sort of has
Yeah.
a lot of focus on modernity, especially.
Yeah.
There is some technology there.
Yeah.
The voice recorder and the trains, like London's fancy train system.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. But yeah, like I would say for me, something that I've noticed is that like in the 80s and 90s in Stephen King, there's the boom and there's all the people ripping off Stephen King. And then like one of the books actually that they store here that's really good is Paperbacks from Hell, which is this wonderful history of like how this rise of like the cheap drugstore mass market paperbacks became just a huge industry and almost just as quickly collapsed.
Oh, interesting.
And just became like utter trash that you would not want to be seen with any of these. You wouldn't want to have published any of them, and then so no one could sell, whereas people were selling horror like crazy, and then all of a sudden you couldn't put that word on anything anymore.
Interesting. Yeah.
And so then, like you're saying, Joanna, that like you'll repurpose old books or start calling them different genres, or like newer or like contemporary stuff will get a different name. It'll be psychological, it'll be dark, something.
Dark fantasy.
But now it's sort of like the pendulum has swung back, and it seems like we're comfortable calling stuff horror. And so as Joan was saying, we just had Adriana Chartrand in with her book On Ordinary Violence, which is out by House of Nancy, which is a popular press, but seen as like a very literary press. And most literary presses would not call anything horror, even if it was. And they're calling that book horror.
Yes, they are. Very proudly, which is exciting to see, and very genuinely. So I think, again, that's similar to what I was maybe trying to articulate earlier, which is sort of a shift in perception. Like horror's been around for centuries and everything, but when you were talking about the paperbacks from hell in the 70s and 80s, that reminded me of like there were maybe a film equivalent video nasties that were around in, I think, the 70s and 80s or 80s and 90s that were quickly derided as absolute trash that you couldn't read. And so I think that followed the genre in a number of mediums for a long time. And now that's an excellent example of people are being more open with directly saying, this is horror and it's worth reading.
Yeah, I think there's a relationship between books and social media too. Like generally I hate social media and I don't like going on it, but when books and social media, there's kind of, I feel like there's a general interest in minorness, you know, so people finding something kind of obscure and then saying, you know, here's something I love and this is why I love it, and that it can make the rounds a little bit, like weird, odd things, and then things can become cults. You know, there's a cult interest in things. So I think that probably helps horror.
Yeah, I can also just become very like, all my words, possessive as well. That people like, they like their thing, and if you like it, or you don't like it as much as you don't get it. And that does exist in horror a fair bit, but that's something where, like with the opening up of different voices, like we are seeing that kind of pushback, but like the actual wave of people enjoying and sharing something that's different seems to be stronger than, you know, the old guard saying this is how it should be, kind of things.
Yeah, it's good to say why you like something, to figure out how to say why you like something, and people can do that a bit more, hopefully democratically.
That's it. That's all our homework. Do we have any audience questions? Anything you guys want to ask? Anything? Ask Seyward or Joanna or us? We're having put it together.
Too good to read.
Oh. Good, but I don't know, I don't know.
They asked if Seyward and Joanna were gonna read, and we hadn't planned on it, but I guess if we have enough time, if you guys wanted to do something very short, we certainly could.
Sure. Should we?
We
Is
were,
is there a
Yeah.
general desire for that? Yeah?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, okay,
Yeah.
okay.
we were being different, and it was horrifying.
Yeah.
We're just doing things in reverse.
Yeah, there you go. All right, so
We'll do short readings here. I'll hopefully there's this book right next to me. Okay. Well, there's yours, Joanna. I think mine's right after yours. I think so too. Okay. You. With the awkwardness of finding the story. Okay, if you find yours, or I found here, you read first. I found yours.
Okay, I'm just trying to think of what section I should read that is short. Okay. So this is early on in my story, but not quite the beginning. There's been a fire that has devastated the neighbor's house, and the narrator is about to have a second encounter with the specter. October, 6 weeks after the fire. It was early evening when I saw the specter again, and already long dark as we headed toward winter. James and I were curled up together on the Chesterfield. He was engrossed in his novel, but instead of flipping through the home journal, I was trying to commit our sitting room to memory. I was 12 weeks pregnant, and as soon as I told James the news, he had begun looking at larger, newer houses. Lovely as our little home was, it was suddenly too small, and the fire had cemented his idea that it was no place to raise a family. I stared through the glass and spotted the specter's unnatural shape in the middle of our lawn. I stared in disbelief, and cold sparks rushed through my chest as I realized she was staring right back at me. James, I whispered, fumbling for his hand. James, do you see her? He glanced up, then clutched my wrist. Look away, Beth. Keep reading. He cast his eyes back down, but I couldn't. Her bright, blank stare didn't waver, and her right hand, so thin that if not for the spider-like spread of her fingers, I wouldn't have trusted it was there, was stretching toward our house. She lurched forward, and my heart caught in my throat. Beth, don't, James warned again. We're each going to read one more page. Then we're going to get up, join hands, turn out the lamp, and go upstairs. Do you understand? He hadn't spoken to me so urgently since the fire. Even though our house had never caught, it still felt as though he'd saved my life that night. I looked at my magazine, following his orders, though I could still feel the itch of the specter's gaze on my skin. I looked up again and seized James's hand. The specter had flung her left hand forward too. I couldn't tell where her fingers ended against the night sky, but it seemed as if she had latched onto some invisible hold and was dragging herself closer. James gave my hand a shake, then pulled me up, and we hurried to the bedroom. Despite James's assurances that she couldn't enter our home, I spent the rest of the night watching for shadows trespassing beyond our curtains, listening for footsteps, knocks, or tapping. Toward dawn, my mind finally began to drift, and I remembered the nights I used to watch Millicent's lamp glowing through the curtains from her upstairs window. I'd had trouble sleeping then too, and could never relax until her room had gone dark.
I'll just read a few pages right from the beginning of my story, which is called Look No More. All my life I had avoided others like me. There's nothing complex to say about this. Their presence made me sad. I heard too well the screams behind their closed eyes, the feeling of the night's immensity pressing down. To be a person is to feel like something. I do, of course, know what it feels like to be myself, but my feelings are not like an unmodified person's. Too much knowing, too much control, limited future paths. We have lives less capable of surprise and metamorphosis, source of anxiety, but also of happiness. Only once did I think things could be different. I met Kay when we were 29-year-old teaching assistants. The professor was a hologram of a charismatic Shakespeare scholar who had lived in the 2010s named Mary Lindquist. The topic was Midsummer Night's Dream, the subject violent and impersonal passion expressed without regard for an object. I had seen this lecture many times. I knew to stand on the second row of the dim stairs off stage right so that Lindquist's hologram would turn across 2,000 sedate heads, look into my eyes, fan its hand and mock coquettishly across its cardigan and break from lecturing to give this anecdote. There was a tradition in Minnesota where I grew up in a Norwegian village called May Day. On May Day, you can go ring anybody's doorbell and demand a kiss. Whoever lives there has to chase you, wrestle you to the ground and kiss you. I have 2 sisters. Obviously, our doorbell was ringing all day long. The students laughed, but Lindquist's original students must have laughed a little longer because there was a pause of a few seconds before the hologram continued. One May Day, the doorbell rang and my youngest and most beautiful sister answered. On our porch stood a very confused goat wearing a blue clip-on bow tie. He took off bleeding, she chased him down, she wrestled him to the ground, she grabbed his snout and kissed his mouth. For that moment, my sister was in love with the goat. Desire expresses and expresses. I turned my head. Against the far wall, nestled in the darkness between pot lights with her arms crossed over her flat chest and one breached leg propped behind her, Kay drooped her dark bare eyes to half spare me her mockery. As if to tease her for her otherwise ascetic style, the short thick hair parted bluntly in the middle, white button-up shirt, round wire glasses, her mouth was full and seemed to be sucking on a flower petal. She lightly smacked the back of one hand. No, no, Lenny. I blushed. There it was. She had seen me sharing a look of love with a hologram. Under her attention, I saw myself as a tragicomic figure. For the first time in my life, I did not think of my modifications and feel ashamed of myself and betrayed by my parents who had chosen this for me. That evening, I went to the top of my tower block and out onto one of the parquettes suspended by steel cables to sit on a bench and stare across the chasm of this anxious, pragmatic inland megacity and to ask myself for the 1000th time, was this desire? Far off down the canyon of towers rose the highway on stilts. Below it swirled other highways stacked on top of one another, emptying into arteries that led to various districts. But that impossibly tall, spindly highway is the one that leads out past the recycling plants and the airport southeast to another country. God, the anxiety of staring into the distance to where the highway shrinks to a point, that final destination, the end in the road. For years, I'd had a recurring dream, all 8 lanes of red rear lights are climbing the steep incline at an unwavering rate of motion to a precipice where the highway stops, and they fall off into an ever-expanding heap of silent wreckage and unspinning wheels while a voice counts 1, 2, 3, 4.
It's by popular demand.
Any more audience
Yeah,
questions?
are there any questions?
Gregory.
Based on those 2 readings, my question is about rhythm. Both of you have such a distinct rhythm in the style of your stories. How do you find that rhythm?
Right, so we have to say it for the audience at home. So we had a question about the rhythm of their stories. How do you find your rhythm when you're writing? Sorry, Jim, I ruined the rhythm.
For me, it's kind of a process of going over and going over and going over and reading it both in my head and then reading it aloud and then trying to imagine the character's voice as I'm doing that, which is potentially quite annoying if my partner is in the same room as me or nearby. But yeah, for this story, actually, from the first sentence, the voice in this one came easier than other ones. So that was just, yeah, surprising, actually.
It's a good question, and I don't have a long answer other than the rhythm for me I have to like have a rhythm, some sort of pitter-pattering little rhythm that comes first, and then I can write the thing. So I need the rhythm in order to like, if I feel like it's the groove of the story, then I can continue working in the rhythm. But if I don't have a rhythm, I can't write it. And I don't know how to do it.
Anyone else? Oh, we got 2.
Go first. Yeah.
Yeah.
Writers have good times when they're just thoughts are just flowing and everything's magic. And then there's other times when you're sort of struggling. What keeps you motivated during those bouts of struggling times?
So yeah, that question was about what keeps you motivated when it's not going so well, when the writing is tougher. What keeps you going?
That's a good question. Yeah, I think so for me, if it's not going well, I just have to stop thinking about where it all might lead to. And just do it, just sit down and do it for itself, just because I like doing it and being in the flow of it. But I just have to stop thinking about the end result, and just loosen up. And I'll set a timer and work to a timer too, and just only do that. Yeah, so I don't know. Yeah, it's kind of like a sport. Like, yeah, it's like, yeah, you know, yeah, training for a sport or something. But yeah, for me, it's just not caring what happens.
Yeah, it's just sitting down, and if it's necessary at the time, pushing your head against the wall until you can get another word on the page, even if it feels like your forehead is bleeding or whatnot. But yeah, sitting down to do it, being disciplined about it. Usually, actually, once I sit down to start and I'm looking at the words that I've written, even if it's a horrible first draft, that will get rid of the rest of the noise, whatever inner critic or self-doubt is plaguing me at the time. And if that doesn't work, because sometimes it's quite severe, then reading something I'm excited about, whether that's going back to an old favorite or picking something up sporadically, that'll usually help refresh the brain.
I have a follow-up question to that. So do both of you guys have writing routines for those moments when it's like, yeah, you are struggling to maybe have like a dip, right? Like you guys kind of say, yeah, it doesn't matter. I'm sitting down, I'm gonna try writing today.
I have things that I can do to help. We've done them together sometimes. We've done group writing before. So I'll like start just by writing down every word I can think of that begins with a certain letter, or I'll copy out paragraphs from someone else's book, a paragraph I like, just something to, yeah, something that isn't actually involving a lot of work. And then, but just like the fact that I'm there with a pen and pencil in my hand means that something will happen. Yeah.
Yeah, I usually try on my days off to wake up and just start, because I find that's the easiest part of the day to start. If I do something like, okay, well, I'll just do the dishes, or okay, I'll get grocery shopping out of the way, it's amazing how the day just spirals into not writing. But if I sit down and start the day that way, I'm more likely to continue. And then sometimes if it's going poorly and the writing routine, I will rationalize with myself to high hell, and just say like, okay, you can write a sentence, or okay, if you can't work on this thing, another thing that I do like to do is you can rewrite a paragraph that you're excited about from another book.
Hi, this one's for Adam and Keith. So you have a pretty sizable anthology here, which is awesome. But I'm wondering how you went about structuring it and ordering the stories for kind of maximum momentum.
Sure.
That's a really good question.
Yeah, so that was for the editors here. That was about how do we structure the stories for, you know, maximum effect and intrigue. My question implies that we did. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, that was, yeah, like just, that was again like where I think us having similar tastes and working so in a similar fashion sort of worked well for us. That when we sat down with all these stories, we sort of, even though like we all have our own different interpretations, we like different things to like different degrees, we sort of pulled the same things out of all the stories. I think in terms of like, what's this story about? What's the tone of this one? What's the pace? We were always on the same page of like sort of how those component pieces came together.
I think I'm gonna date myself here, and I've said this before, but I see anthologies as like making the perfect mixtape. And like, you know, how the song ends and the song starts, and kind of like how a story finishes and how a story starts, and like having these ebbs and flows with the pacing and everything, the structure we're talking about. So yeah. I feel. Yeah.
Yeah, it was very much, yeah, just, do you want to put that one there? No.
Yeah, and like not even just looking at it as like an editor, but as a reader, and being like, would I enjoy this if like I had just picked this book up to read it myself, having no involvement in it whatsoever.
Mhm. Yeah.
I have a question related to Adam's questions on routine, but I'm gonna ask the whole panel. Do you write every day?
Yeah, they asked, so for Richie, do we all write every day? There's a lot of head shaking.
And then you know this answer.
It's finger wagging, yeah.
It's true.
Yeah, no, I don't. I find that very difficult to do every day. I have like done various incarnations of a routine where like I have tried to keep up doing it every day, and you know, I can get it going for a pretty good streak, but it always collapses eventually. But
Yeah, I set myself the goal of being a writer who can write every day. And I think that I write more with that goal than I would otherwise, but it doesn't actually manifest into writing every day. I try and look at it more like a number of hours that I put in a week, because it's so easy to set yourself, I'm gonna write every day. And then if you don't, you get into the mindset where it's like, oh, well, I didn't write today, it's all.
Yeah, you
whole
want
week's
to
gone.
avoid that. Like
Yeah.
the addiction to self-lashing that we all probably have in this overproductive society that we live in. Yeah, so you want to just enjoy it. So yeah.
Yeah.
And you can think about it if you're not writing it at that very moment. You don't want to be writing all day long either. Like that would think, you know.
My prompted question is just to make myself feel.
Oh yeah.
It is like, even though we're all like investing time doing it every day, it is something where the longer you go without doing it, the harder it is to go back.
Yeah.
Yes, that's very true.
Because you like convince yourself, or like, I'm not gonna get anything done. You rationalize yourself out of it, or that you end up feeling so guilty for not doing it that you unconsciously avoid it. So, you know, cut yourself some slack here and there. That doing it every day is difficult. We're not all Stephen King, get to spend our mornings doing nothing and then go to baseball games. But still try to get yourself back in the chair, I guess.
I think that's what I like about anthology so much, is I'm accountable to other people.
Yeah.
So I have to actually like put the work in, because everyone's expecting something.
Yeah, for sure. It's tough to stay motivated when you don't have a deadline or an editor or somebody giving you the homework, essentially. Like, where's my stuff?
Yeah, I like to aim for word counts a week. Like,
Yeah.
it's like, yeah.
So what was the inspiration behind the first short story, which was Joanna's?
The inspiration behind that actually came from a writing prompt when I was suffering writer's block. And I just picked up this random little book, and it gave me the prompt to reinvent a cliche, or like to write around a cliche. And the first thing I thought, it was thin as a rail. And from that came the image of the specter that appears in my story. It's very elongated, thin, blackened skin. And yeah, she was just appearing on this woman's lawn, and I kept writing around it to find out why the specter and this woman were drawn to each other.
I think we can do one more. Is there a last one? There's always pressure then. No one wants to be the last one.
It's gotta be good.
So did you both have ideas kind of ready to go that fit this theme, or was it like, I kind of have this tickling of an idea, and now that I've been asked, I think I've got somewhere to go with this, or some combination?
I think it was more like the second one for me. Like I had an idea, I had this world that I was working in, and then I was like, okay, I'll just maybe this will help me have a plot. This prompt, yeah.
Yeah, it was similar for me too. I had this story that I'd been writing around and sort of reworking with various sections, and this opportunity came along, and this prompt, and it made me think about it in a different way. And again, with the very helpful deadlines and very helpful editors, I really had to focus on getting it to work and fleshing it out.
Yeah, I think so. Thanks very much, everyone. We'll let John come out of the backstage area there. And stick around, come join us at the signing table. We'll be really happy to meet you all in person and hopefully you buy some books. That'd be nice. Yeah, thanks for coming. Thanks, everyone. Yeah.
Thank you all so very much. So as Keith and Adam mentioned, we will be moving along to the signing portion of the evening. So I'll ask you all just to remain in place for one moment while we safely shift everybody over there, at which point you can come over and get copies of your anthology signed. We'll also be meeting up with 2 other contributors sitting at the table to sign books as well. The only thing I will put in your head right now is that you're welcome to have copies of the book signed before you pay for them. Just please do pay for the book at some point. There are books both at the cash desk and at the signing table. We're so incredibly grateful to Little Ghosts for putting out this anthology in the first place and looking forward to further publications from them. So grateful to all of you for your attention, for your questions, both here and online. And I'd like you to join me one more time in acknowledging Seyward Goodhand, Joanna Graham, Adam Petrash, and Keith Cadieux. Have a wonderful night, everyone.